Hello and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jake Daly. On this Wednesday, May 21st, got a good show for you today. Going to talk a little bit more on this new commission and could it be threatened by state laws. Tennessee recently introduced a bill into their Senate that could threaten what some of the commission's, requirements, what their goals are for this new organization. Could state laws impact that? We're also going to dive into the flag football team in 2028. Some college stars that I think could potentially make that team in 3 years. Guys that are stars right now that could have the skill sets to kind of translate that to flag football. We're also going to do a little ACC preview today, as well as continue our SEC rankings. Make sure you stick around for that. And we're going to talk about who is the real wide receiver U. I don't know. It's interesting. Especially in the past decade, there's been a couple programs that are up there. But before I dive into anything, I just want to remind everybody, this show is all about you. We love hearing your comments, your questions, your insights, your opinions. Anything you got, we want to hear it. We want to make this show as interactive, as exciting as possible. Now, if you're on YouTube, one way you can do that is to use the Super Chat feature. To use the Super Chat feature, all you have to do is click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, type in your message there, send that in. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, gets read live. It's also just a great way to support our channel, support what we're trying to build here at GSMC. We are so grateful to have you all here as a part of our community. And if you're not on YouTube, Super Chat's not your thing, you can also go to gsmcpodcast.net to comment, tip, donate, whatever there on that website, which is gsmcpodcast.net. Now, let's get into this whole commission. So on May 1st, perhaps in signing that was intentionally kind of quiet, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee scrawled his name across the bottom of a 6-page state bill. So Tennessee Senate Bill number 536, the details were kind of unearthed this past week, but essentially it paves the way for state schools, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Memphis, etc., and their collectives, their affiliated NIL collectives, to break House settlement-related rules and kind of prevent the college sports new enforcement entity in the College Sports Commission from penalizing those schools for kind of circumventing any House-related NIL type issues. So basically, in layman's terms, this law is a missile launched across the bow towards those plans from the NCAA and the power conferences to kind of police this new NIL revenue sharing era of college athletics. They're taking aim at the compensation cap, at the severe penalties for rule breakers, the policies that kind of prevent phony booster-backed NIL deals. That's all kind of taking aim at this Tennessee bill. However, power conferences, their executives, they kind of have a plan to combat this type of state law, which could be introduced in states across the country. Officials from the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, the Big 12, are circulating a draft of kind of a groundbreaking document, first of its kind, but essentially this document is intended to prevent universities from using those state laws to violate new enforcement rules. And a brand new kind of stunning concept, it would require schools to waive their right to pursue any legal challenges against the new enforcement entity. They wouldn't be able to sue the College Sports Commission like we've seen so many lawsuits against the NCAA, especially in terms of antitrust kind of violations. That's been something we've seen a lot in the past decade or so. That would not be allowed in this new kind of document. It's been viewed by dozens of school administrators it would bind institutions to those enforcement policies, even if the state law is contradictory, such as it may be in Tennessee now. It would be interesting. It would exempt the CSC, the College Sports Commission, from lawsuits from their member schools over enforcement decisions, instead offering a route for schools to pursue arbitration instead. And the document's kind of been described as an affiliation or a membership agreement. It's not finalized, right? That's a key here. This thing still could change. But the draft that's been distributed to a number of school presidents, general counsels, athletic directors, it's all kind of being refined right now. There's been concerns that have been brought up behind the scenes from some of those people, but they're kind of trying to refine this, finalize it, and it's something that's meant to be signed by all Power Conference schools, perhaps some others as well. So maybe some of those Group of 5 teams that we kind of see at the top, right? Boise States, the Fresno States, those type of schools, could we see them kind of opt into a similar settlement as a way to kind of bind the group together, provide stability around the enforcement of these new rules? I think that's something that's very possible. It also includes decisions from the new Deloitte-run NIL clearinghouse. It's being dubbed NIL Go, which is an entity that's kind of expected to enforce stricter NIL laws, enforce kind of booster payouts by guys such as Cody Campbell, those big-time boosters at some of these programs that can just throw a bunch of money towards the football program, towards basketball, whatever. They kind of want to combat that. And the consequence for not signing this agreement is super steep. A school risks the loss of conference membership, of participation against other Power League programs. One AD who's seen the document, he said, you either sign it or we don't play you. That's kind of how it seems like it's going to be laid out. Another Power Conference president with membership knowledge of the document, he said as a condition of membership, you must comply with the settlement and the enforcement. So this is kind of written in. You have to sign this or we're not going to play you. And that's a little concerning for schools such as Tennessee. This is an agreement, though, that's kind of evolved over time. Yahoo Sports first learned of its existence in February, and since then, it's kind of changed a couple different times. Administrators just got the latest version in the past few weeks, but this is something that, again, could change. The future kind of remains murky. First, before anything happens, the House settlement has to be finalized. It has to be granted approval from Judge Claudia Wilkin, and revenue sharing is supposed to start on July 1st. So there's kind of a deadline there, but it's up to her. That timeline is up to Claudia Wilkin. We're not sure. Everything kind of has to be approved at first, which is still a question mark. We still don't know, will this House settlement actually go through? Will that kind of grandfathering in affect the approval of the settlement? Not sure yet, but it's interesting. There's a couple different aspects to this that I think it's interesting. Signing an agreement exempting a state university from following its own state law is a little troubling, right? It's especially true when the consequence is potentially getting evicted from your own conference. So think of Tennessee. If they're threatened with being kicked out of the SEC, can they really go against that, even though it may violate their own state law? That kind of concept is actually addressed in Tennessee state law. The law prevents an athletic association from adopting and enforcing rules that violate state law, prohibits any association from, quote, interfering with the school's membership status, voting rights, and revenue distribution. So they're kind of trying to build a safeguard in there for Tennessee to remain in the SEC, Vanderbilt to remain in the SEC, Memphis to remain in the AAC. If they follow this state law and kind of circumvent the rules. It seems like they're trying to build protections in for their own universities. And this has been something that I think it's going to happen across the country. We might start seeing more of these states try to implement laws to get around and kind of circumvent the rules. The Tennessee law is pretty interesting. It gives schools and third parties in the state cover, and that was the actual word that was in the document, quote, cover, not to follow the rules that may be subject to antitrust scrutiny. Many of the House settlement rules, concepts, everything that's kind of related to that House settlement, especially the clearinghouse, this NIL type clearinghouse, it could all be in jeopardy of such scrutiny from these state laws. But the settlement is expected to kind of usher in a new, more professionalized model where schools can share millions of dollars of revenue with athletes in kind of a salary cap type system. The NIL Go clearinghouse, I think, is really interesting, and Deloitte themselves said at the ACC spring meetings this past week, their officials shared figures that 70% of past deals from booster collectives would have been denied, 90% of past deals from public companies would have been approved, and then in March they shared even more figures. They said about 80% of NIL deals with public companies were valued at less than $10,000, 99% of those deals were valued at less than $100,000. So those numbers kind of suggest that this clearinghouse threatens to really curtail the millions of dollars that these collectives are distributing to athletes, right? If they use this as a model, we're not going to see, the $4 million quarterback anymore. That's just not how it's going to work. Salaries, and they're basically salaries right now, right? They're kind of masquerading as endorsement deals, whatever, especially the booster-based ones. We might not see that now because of this clearinghouse. I think that's a big component of this too. We're going to be able to see if this affiliation agreement is able to kind of curtail schools circumventing around these laws. The state NIL laws, especially in particular places, just kind of permit their universities to do that, to go around the rules because there's no enforcement. Is this going to be something where this affiliation agreement actually works? Will they be able to kind of say, hey, no, you can't get around these rules? Even if your state kind of permits it, you can't do that. You're going to be gone from our league. You're going to be gone from your conference. You're going to lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue if you try to go around these rules. That's kind of what they're hoping is going to be the case. We'll see if that actually is going to be the case. Is that going to see how this is all going to kind of shake out? Especially with the CEO, with this new executive board, is it going to be something where it makes sense to actually enforce the rules? Is it going to be something that schools try to get around and are capable of getting around? What will be the punishments? We're not really sure, but this is still a situation that is very fluid. We're going to see how it's all going to shake out, hopefully in the next couple months, and we're going to see the future of college football, where the sport could potentially go, what's going to happen, and will rules actually be enforced? That's going to be the big question. So right now, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, I want to look at some current guys in college football that I think have shots at potentially making the 2028 flag football team for the Olympics for the United States of America. We're going to talk about that when we come back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network on this Wednesday, May 21st. Just touched on this commission, what could potentially happen. But a couple of guys that will be out of college by that time in 2028 are some of the guys that I'm going to talk about now in potential players who could make the Olympic flag football roster in 2028 for the USA. But before I dive into that, I want to remind everybody that this show is all about you. We love hearing from you. We love hearing your comments, your questions, your opinions, your hot takes, your insights, whatever you got. We want to hear it. We want to make this show as interactive, as exciting as possible. Now, if you're on YouTube, one easy way to do that is to use a super chat feature. To use a super chat feature, all you have to do is click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, send in your message there. This guarantees that it gets on the air, gets read live. It's also a great way to support our channel, support what we're trying to build here at GSMC. We couldn't do what we do without your ongoing support. Now, if YouTube's not your thing, if Super Chat's not your thing, you can also go to gsmcpodcast.net to comment, to donate there. Again, that website is gsmcpodcast.net. Now, let's get into the Olympics. When the Olympics come to Los Angeles, the City of Stars, in 2028, perhaps the most American sport of them all will make its debut on the stage, on the world stage. Flag football coming to the Olympics, both men's and women's. It's going to be fun. And then the news comes out yesterday that the NFL will allow active players to participate in Olympic flag football, opening the door for a potential kind of dream team in 2028 when that time comes around. However, 2028, there's still 3 years, right? There could be some guys that are in college that are just coming into their peaks that could potentially make this roster. And you also got to note, skill sets don't necessarily align with flag football. Think of a guy like Peter Woods at Clemson. Yeah, great football player in tackle football, in the traditional kind of football-esque landscape, I guess, but not going to be a guy you want on your flag football team. So with all that kind of being considered, the first guy I have, it's got to be Jeremiah Smith, right? This is a kid that lit the college football world on fire last year as a true freshman. 1,300 receiving yards, 15 touchdowns for Ohio State, en route to leading them to a national championship, being their number one wide receiver throughout the entire year on a stacked Ohio State team that also included Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, some of those other guys. It was Jeremiah Smith's wide receiver room. This is a kid that could have potentially been the first overall draft pick this year if he was allowed to come out after his freshman year. Now, the biggest hurdle for him, easily, is just the depth of wide receiver talent in the NFL right now. Wide receiver, for sure, is one of the most stacked positions at this time throughout the NFL. You have stars pretty much everywhere across the league, especially just considering the kind of emphasis that has been placed on the passing game. But if anybody can kind of break through that top tier of wide receivers, it's going to be Jeremiah Smith. This is a kid that has pretty much every tool you want as a wide receiver. 6'3", 210, smooth, able to go up and catch a ball, able to break through an open field. This is a kid I would want on my team if I was the U.S. going into 2028. Another guy on defense I think would be kind of interesting is Harold Perkins, LSU. Could this be like the perfect football role for Harold Perkins? In college, he's kind of struggled to play his natural position of pass rusher. This is a pure rusher, right? But he's a smaller guy, doesn't have a huge frame, kind of gets pushed around in the SEC at times. If you put that in the flag football universe, that is much less of a concern. This is a guy that he's able to start off the ball, that gives a lot of extra benefit to speed, agility, and rushers have to be able to kind of respond to potential running plays, to dropping back in coverage. Harold Perkins can do all of that. This is a guy that, as a pass rusher, he's much more reliant on speed, on agility, quickness, get off. That's just his type of game. Then he's spent the past 2 years refining both his run-stopping potential and his dropping back into coverage. If you put him in a flag football defense, let him kind of be an Army Swiss knife, just roam around, affect the game in a lot of different ways. This is a kid that I think would do really well in that type of structure. Has all the physical tools, has shown glimpses of his star potential. I think if he puts that all together, especially if you give him a couple years of seasoning, you give him this year at LSU where I think he's gonna do really great. Then you give him a couple years in the NFL to kind of hone in on all of those well-rounded traits. This is a guy that can easily have an impact for you on defense. Have him roam around, be one of your pass rushers, but he can do a lot of different things on defense. Harold Perkins is a guy that I would certainly consider for this roster. Another guy, a teammate of Jeremiah Smith, is Caleb Downs. Now, Caleb Downs, he had an argument as the best safety in America as a freshman at Alabama, then transfers to Ohio State, All-American year, leader of that defense, showcases what makes him so special as a safety, and now heading into 2025 as perhaps the best defender in college football, regardless of position. This guy is an absolute stud. 189 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, 10 passes defended, 4 interceptions in the past 2 years, including just a dominant performance at the back end of that Ohio State defense last year in 2024. Additionally, flag football rosters are small, right? They only have 10 spots. So if you can potentially play 2 ways, that makes you much more valuable. Caleb Downs can do that. This is a kid that was an awesome player on offense in high school. 20 rushing touchdowns on only 57 carries as a senior for a state championship winning team. This is a guy that also campaigned for running back snaps during Ohio State's run to the national title last year. So clearly would be open to playing on offense. A guy that is just an explosive athlete, has a ton of potential there, and could you throw him in the backfield too at running back on certain plays? But when you look at him on defense, a guy that can do everything you want out of a defender. Long, lanky, athletic, can run across the entire field, super aware safety, a guy that you can stick on the back end there in a flag football game, and he can just wreak havoc in that defensive backfield. He would be on my team. I'm telling you, this kid, he's just too good of an athlete, just too good of a football player, would be able to make that transition really easily to the flag game, I think. Caleb Downs would certainly be on my roster. Another guy that I think kind of under the radar, but when you look at running backs, that's a kind of a concern. I don't know. I wouldn't say concern, kind of a question mark. Would you put a wide receiver at running back just because of the pass potential there, or would you keep a running back? Now, if you would keep a running back, I think one of the guys that would fill that would be Desmond Reed, Pittsburgh. It's kind of a complicated part of flag football, right? Runners are normally asked to kind of maneuver through tight spaces, withstand contact, but they're still best utilized in space. since running the ball is such a small part of the equation too, you need to have a guy that can go out and catch passes. Desmond Reed is that kind of all-rounded running back, can go out of the backfield, catch passes really easily. Probably the best all-purpose running back returning in college football this year. This was a guy that was electric last year, had almost 1,000 rushing yards, 966 on the ground, then also had 579 yards receiving, 9 total touchdowns, 52 receptions, including 3 100-yard receiving games, all against power conference competition, so it wasn't like they were playing, Youngstown State week 1. These were against power conference opponents, so this is a guy that his skill set would really translate, would be able to obviously take a couple carries out of the backfield, but having that pass catching ability just makes him dynamic, makes him a really well-rounded running back for a potential flag football team. That's a guy that I think is under the radar, obviously. I don't know if he would get the kind of NFL hype that we're probably going to need to get on to this Olympic team in 2028, but a guy that I think would fit really well with the whole kind of dynamics of flag football. Another guy that I would have off of pure potential would be Nick Harbor, South Carolina. Now, he has yet to put it all together, right? Only had 26 receptions for 376 receiving yards last year, 3 touchdowns, but this guy's upside is insane. 5-star prospect as an athlete, a guy that was a tight end, has now transitioned to more of a wide receiver, but he's 6'5", he's 235, has really great body control. He's super strong throughout his entire frame, a dynamic talent, and just because of his development possibilities. This is a guy that is consistently able to get downfield, consistently a threat to get over the top. You could go to him in the red zone and 6'6", give him a jump ball. He can catch some passes for you there. And then also, this is a guy that at 6'5", 235 has world-class speed. World-class speed. Ran the 100 meters in 10.28 seconds in April 22. Ran the 200 in 20.79. World-class speed at 6'5", 235. And then a guy that also played on defense in high school. Was kind of an edge outside linebacker. As that type of position, could you play him 2 ways? Have him be more of that freak speed edge rusher, or even a guy covering people as he's kind of developed his wide receiver skills. Could that be a guy that you could really do a whole lot with on a flag football team? I think the possibilities are endless with Nick Harbor, and I just think it'd be a guy that's would make a lot of sense, would be a lot of fun to watch on a flag football competition, especially on the world stage in 2028. So right now, we're going to take our second break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk some ACC ball. We're going to do a little kind of preview primer of the conference, talk about the big storylines, talk about kind of who's contending, who's not, but we're going to dive into all of that when we come back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Just talked a little bit about some guys that could maybe win gold in 2028 with the flag football Olympic team. Gonna switch gears, gonna talk now about the ACC, a really interesting conference overall, I think. One of the big things here is the league in general is kind of in a middle ground across the broader college landscape, right? On the field, there's a team that's a trendy pick to win the national title right now. There's a handful of kind of up-and-coming contenders, and then essentially the remaining set of teams that are basically going to be a couple coin flips away from either being bowl eligible or not, or having a good year or a mediocre one. ACC, it doesn't really feel any closer to the SEC and the Big Ten right now in terms of overall potential, but it's going to be must-watch action. There's a number of different storylines kind of swirling around these 17 teams in the ACC who are all trying to make it to Charlotte for that title game in December. So, because of all this, right, there's not going to be any shortage of interest in the ACC. Even if the level of play from week to week, it might not be quite as high as some of these other leagues that we're going to see, it's still going to be entertaining football. Obviously, right now, the title favorite, it's got to be Clemson. It's the Tigers. Does Dabo Swinney kind of have his groove back? It certainly seems like that might be the case in Clemson land. Tigers return a bulk of their two-deep depth chart from last year's ACC championship winning team, and they're kind of hoping that the flukish way they made the college football playoff, and it was honestly really flukish, can kind of be that growing pain that those core group of players who are returning in 2025 can put in the back of their memory and take that, bottle it, use it moving forward as momentum to build upon for this upcoming year. This isn't just a group of good players coming back, though. There's a lot of potential for upwards of 4 first-round picks. There's some high-end talent on this Clemson Tigers roster. Cade Klubnik, obviously returning at quarterback for his third year as a starter, has a lot around him, too, in terms of returning offensive pieces. That pretty much entire wide receiver room, Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco Jr. coming back, those are big pieces. They have 4 starters coming back on the offensive line. You still have Peter Woods, TJ Parker on the defensive line. You have Avian Terrell at cornerback. You have a lot of pieces here coming back. Garrett Riley back as offensive coordinator should have consistency there in that scheme. And then defensively, bringing in Tom Allen from Penn State to run that unit is going to be a big upgrade for them. I would expect to see at least some medium level type of improvement from the Clemson defense. There's a lot to work with there. If there's kind of one question mark that's hovering around Clemson right now, it's probably the schedule. You have LSU week 1. You also have to play at South Carolina this year. And then in league play, you have a 4-game stretch starting in late October that includes SMU, Duke, and a trip to Louisville, which when you're looking at ACC play, that's almost as tough as it gets, right? Besides Clemson, there's kind of a couple other dark horses in the ACC this year. SMU obviously is going to be there after hanging right around getting into the college football playoff last season. I think Miami is kind of a dark horse as well. Still a really talented program there. Carson Beck coming in as the starting quarterback. It's going to be interesting. Louisville. I think Louisville is really, really intriguing this year. Won 9 games last year under Jeff Brom. Bringing in another transfer quarterback in Miller Moss, who may have the highest upside potential of any of the 3 transfer quarterbacks that Jeff Brom has brought in during his time as the Louisville head coach. You also have Colin Lacey there at wide receiver. You have a really great 1-2 punch at running back, Isaac Brown, Duke Watson. A really great defense returning for Louisville. They're a dark horse there. Aiming high then, too, you have Duke coming off a 9-win season, bringing in Darian Mensah at quarterback from Tulane. That's an intriguing roster. Georgia Tech, returning Haynes King, returning Jamal Haynes. They do lose Eric Singleton Jr. at wide receiver, but this is a team that's returning a lot and had a lot of confidence to build on at the end of the season. Can they take that Georgia loss in November, kind of turn that into some positive momentum going into 2025? I think it's certainly very possible. North Carolina, I'm going to get into them in a minute, but aiming high certainly. Then you have kind of those battling for a bowl teams. You have the Boston College, the Florida States, Syracuse is going to be interesting, coming off the 10-win season. How do they bounce back after losing Kyle McCord, losing Trevor Pena, losing Murad Watson? That's going to be an interesting situation to look at there in New York. Virginia Tech. Can Virginia Tech bounce back? There were high expectations for them and Kyron Jones in 2024. Obviously, they did not reach those. Can that be something that they maybe are able to fix? If the rain is coming through, I apologize, but we're going to get through it right now. So the ACC really kind of seems stratified coming out of spring practice right now. There's a couple programs in Stanford, Wake Forest, Cal that are kind of all trying to just stay afloat right now. There's a couple of really true contenders to make the college football playoff. Then there's, that whole middle tier where, I don't know. It could kind of go either way. If there's one key to finding separation, I think this year, it's going to come down to having a quarterback or not. You have Clemson, SMU, obviously both returning quality starters, in Cade Klubnik, Kevin Jennings. And then you have Miami, Louisville, Duke, North Carolina all bringing in high-profile quarterback transfers in Carson Beck, Miller Moss, Darian Mensah, and Gio Lopez there for the Tar Heels. That's going to be interesting. How those guys play, I think, could be the difference maker in who's a legit college football playoff contender, legit ACC championship contender, and who's just pretending. One of the top storylines here, I think, Chapel Bill. It's got to be. Tar Heels, they barely even practice in 2025, yet pretty much all the greater college football world can think about is Bill Belichick. Is this actually going to work here? Will all these kind of PR off the field incidents, these recent mishaps, is it going to kill any momentum? And then just on the field in general, will this kind of NFL type of management translate? The schedule is manageable enough to give some optimism for those around Chapel Hill, kind of having an actual schematic advantage for once. But there's going to need to be some pretty weighty expectations met for this to be a success in year one. This is a program, obviously, known far more for their success on the basketball court than their success on the gridiron. But they don't simply go hire Bill Belichick, pay him $10 million, pay his staff even more than that, and then go, yeah, we're okay with the 7-5, 8-4 type years that Mac Brown had done for 5-6 years there. There's going to be a lot of casual fans turning into North Carolina, but there's some high expectations here. I don't think they would have done all of that to be okay with going 8-4 every year. So either way, just seeing Bill Belichick roam the sidelines there in Chapel Hill is going to be the top storyline here. How is it all going to shake out? What's going to happen? Another kind of under the radar storyline. With the legal settlements that Clemson and Florida State signed with the ACC that basically gives them an out of the conference in about 5 years, is it going to be all okay? The longer-term impact of the settlement of that type of agreement, it's going to take some more time to kind of fully digest. But it's not every day that a school goes out, racks up a ton of billable hours fighting this contract for the ACC, that media rights deal, and then show up to media days and go, oh yeah, everything's great. I don't know. That seems a little suspicious to me. So that's going to be something to watch. How those settlements kind of shake out. What's the fallout from there? What do other ACC programs think about that? And what could potentially happen, I think, is going to be an interesting storyline. Obviously, there's a couple new coaches here. The big one, Bill Belichick. But you also have Jake Dickert taking over at Wake Forest after Dave Clawson stepped down. Coming across from Washington State, they're coming off back-to-back 4-8 seasons. There's no denying that this is going to be a tough job, especially kind of given this new transfer portal, NIL type era. But he's won in a lot of tough places. Could be an interesting hire. You have Stanford bringing in Frank Reich on an interim basis. Stanford in general. It's going to be an interesting program to watch this year. I don't know what's going to happen there. I think it's going to be a really tough year for Frank Reich, for Stanford in general. Then you got a couple coaches that may be on the hot seat. Tony Elliott kind of running out of time in Charlottesville there for the Virginia Cavaliers. Brent Pry at Virginia Tech kind of took a step back. Dave Doran, Pat Narduzzi, obviously two guys that have been in their respective roles at North Carolina State and Pitt for a long time. But coaches that have had some losing seasons recently, could there be a little more pressure on them? I think that's all something to watch. And then in a similar vein, Mike Norvell obviously has not lived up to expectations there, but has a crazy buyout. So I doubt Florida State gets rid of him. Going to be an interesting storyline to watch, though, for sure. So right now, we're going to take another short break. When we come back, I want to talk about wide receivers. Talk about who is wide receiver you. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to dive in, debate, when we come back on the GSMC College Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network on this Wednesday, May 21st. We've had a good show so far, but we are going to continue on, keep pushing. We're going to talk a little bit about some wide receivers right now, and who has been wide receiver you of the past decade or so. So I kind of looked at numbers since 2015, and I looked at 4 schools. You have the Alabama Crimson Tide, the Ohio State Buckeyes, the LSU Tigers, and the USC Trojans. Now, all of these schools have cases, right? I kind of went down the list. I looked at how many draft picks there have been at the wide receiver position for each of these schools since 2015. So you look at Alabama first. Amari Cooper, first rounder, number 4 overall pick, 2015. Then you had Arjarius Stewart. There was kind of a lull there. 2018, Calvin Ridley gets drafted. Then Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, both in 2020. 2021, another great year. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith get drafted. Jamison Williams gets drafted the next year in the first round in 2022. John Mechie also gets drafted that year in the second round. And then there's kind of been a lull since then. Jermaine Burton was drafted in the third round in 2024, but besides that, kind of been a little low. However, when you look at the total numbers, 7 first-rounders and 1 Heisman winner in that time. You have guys that have put together multiple Pro Bowl seasons. Amari Cooper, one of my favorite wide receivers ever to watch at the college football level. The way he ran routes, how polished he was. A guy that was super impressive coming out of college. 5-time Pro Bowler, has been able to produce a really long, successful NFL career across multiple teams. Raiders, Cowboys, Browns, even the Bills last season. This is a guy that's been a great wide receiver in the National Football League. Calvin Ridley, another guy that had a really solid career for Alabama, has kind of been up and down. His career really got derailed after that suspension for gambling a few years back. Jerry Jeudy, a guy that blossomed this year in Cleveland, had his first Pro Bowl season. A guy that there could be even better things coming from. Jalen Waddle, one of the fastest players in the NFL, a guy that has paired with Tyreek Hill for a dynamic wide receiver duo. His big kind of questions have been injuries, but no question the talent's there. Jalen Waddle, probably a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. Devontae Smith, a guy that his Alabama career was so impressive, he won the Heisman. This is a kid that won a Heisman as a wide receiver. So impressive. Kind of fell to Philly in a perfect landing spot. Pairs with A.J. Brown to have one of the most dynamic pass-catching duos in the NFL. Jameson Williams, also a guy that has kind of shown flashes throughout times for Detroit. But you look at that total group. 7 first-rounders, multiple guys that have had Pro Bowl seasons, a couple guys that are considered in the top 15, 20 of wide receivers in the NFL. Super, super impressive. But Ohio State, look at some of the guys they've had. Now, their success has really been in the past 3 to 5 years. Yes, you did have Michael Thomas get drafted in 2016 in the second round, a guy that at one point had an argument for the best receiver in the NFL, a guy that set the receiving yards record, receptions record for the Saints at one point. Then you kind of had a little lull until Terry McLaurin, third rounder, 2019, a guy that has become Washington's number 1 wide receiver with some really terrible quarterback play that he's had to kind of go through. When you look at some of the guys that they've had at that position before Jaden Daniels, this is a guy that his wide receiver abilities cannot be questioned whatsoever. Kind of a little lull then until you get to 2022. And here's where Ohio State really starts to make their case. Garrett Wilson, first round, number 10 overall pick, 22. The pick right after him, Chris Olave, number 11 overall, 2022. The next year, Jackson Smith and Jigba, number 20 overall, 2023. 2024, then you get Marvin Harrison. It's his turn. First round, 4th overall, probably the best wide receiver prospect that they've had. Then this year, 25, another first rounder, Emeka Egbuka, 19th overall. So that is 4 straight years of a first round wide receiver, and it could continue again this upcoming year. You look at guys like Carnell Tate. Could Carnell Tate kind of go into that next level? Brandon Inniss also has that potential. I would look more at Carnell Tate as the guy. Then you obviously have Jeremiah Smith, the next great one up. Could be the best out of all of them. Won't be draft eligible until 2027. This is a kid, absolute freak. I think he's probably the best one that we've seen come out of Ohio State so far, and we haven't even seen his full potential. We've only seen him as a true freshman, but a guy that's a freak. Ohio State's case, they've made on recency, right? The past 4 years, you look at what Garrett Wilson's done with the Jets, Chris Olave taking over as the number 1 guy for the Saints, Smith and Jigba going to step into a really huge role in Seattle this year with Tyler Lockett gone, with DK Metcalf gone. Marvin Harrison had a really solid rookie year, a guy that is going to be even better in year 2. And then Emeka Egbuka coming in for the Buccaneers, pairing with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, a really interesting slot. Another program, too, is LSU. LSU, again, you kind of look at recently, but since 2020, Justin Jefferson, first rounder. Jamar Chase, 2021. Terrace Marshall. Keishawn Butte was a 6th rounder, but then the past year, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, both first rounders last year. The top 2 wide receivers is of that rookie class in the NFL this past season were Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. in their respective conferences. 2 super impressive guys. And then you have 2 guys that are arguably both have a case for the best receiver in the NFL. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. So this class, it's more on the star power. It's more about Jefferson, Chase, potentially Malik Neighbors, potentially Brian Thomas. We're not sure who the next guy up, though, is at LSU. I don't know. There could be a couple different options, but right now, their case is based on star power. And you look at USC. Nelson Aguilar, Juju Smith-Schuster, Michael Pittman, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's been their best wide receiver in the NFL, was the lowest drafted of all those guys in the 4th round in 2021. Drake London first rounder, Jordan Addison first rounder. So this is a little more kind of an interesting class. I had them here just because of some of the pedigrees of some of these guys, but I don't really think that they're on that same kind of level as Bama, LSU, Ohio State right now. So USC got to be 4 for me. Then each of the other schools kind of have a case. If you're looking at the entire decade, I think the choice is Alabama. When you look at Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, the depth there, the talent there is pretty remarkable. I think that gives them an edge over LSU at least. LSU, yes, you have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, obviously 2 of the biggest names in the NFL. But after that, there's not a whole lot. Malik Neighbors could be one of those guys, but he still has to prove it. Brian Thomas could be one of those guys, still has to prove it though. Alabama has a couple guys that are more proven, that are better placed for success right now, that have proven more in the NFL. Jalen Waddle has had Pro Bowl years. Devontae Smith has had great seasons for the Eagles. Jerry Jeudy just had a Pro Bowl year with the Browns. Amari Cooper, obviously, multiple Pro Bowls. Calvin Ridley even had one. The depth there, I think, gives Alabama an edge. Now, Alabama or Ohio State. This is an interesting one. I think it's got to be Alabama. However, in the next couple years, I think it could certainly be Ohio State. If you look at what Garrett Wilson could potentially develop into, what Olave and Jigba, Marvin Harrison could all develop into, I think the potential there is greater for Ohio State if Marvin Harrison starts putting and stringing Pro Bowl seasons together. If Smith and Jigba takes over as the unquestioned number 1 in Seattle, the potential is there. It's higher for Ohio State. But right now, I think you have to go with Alabama. I think the pedigree here is just too much to ignore. I can certainly see this changing in the next 3 to 4 years as Ohio State gets more guys in. Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, Jeremiah Smith, as that kind of wide receiver unit keeps churning out guys. I think this is a place where we can certainly see Ohio State overtake Alabama. But right now, I think it's the Alabama Crimson Tide as wide receiver U of the past decade. But it's certainly up for debate. That's just my take. I don't know. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. I think it's the Tide, though. I think when you look at the production, when you look at some of those names, it just makes too much sense. Plus, you pair that with the guy that won a Heisman at wide receiver. I think that's a huge factor, too. I think it's the Alabama Crimson Tide. So right now, we are going to take our last break of the show. When we come back, we're going to continue on with our SEC rankings. I got 3 teams today. We're getting down to the last 2 days of this, but we're going to continue on when we come back on the GSMC College Football Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network on this Wednesday, May 21st. Gonna finish off the show today by continuing on with my SEC rankings. We got teams 4, 5, 6 today. Gonna start at 6. And I think it's the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, I can certainly see the argument that other programs should be ranked ahead of Ole Miss right now, and that's fair. Ole Miss is losing a lot. After a year in 2024 in which the Rebels went all in on getting as much talent from the portal as they could, that collection of talent on that roster, I think, was probably a top 3 roster in terms of actual talent last year for Ole Miss. Just self-inflicted mistakes. An avoidable loss at home against Kentucky, a loss at LSU in which they should have won that game. They were leading for the vast majority of it. And also a loss right at the end of the season to Florida, and a game in which they were in prime position to get to the college football playoff to earn one of those bids. But it all fell apart, and they lost. They did not go all in. They did not win last year. It's going to be interesting. After kind of going all in and losing a ton of those guys, there's certainly a lot of row for kind of a loss at Ole Miss. Replacing Jackson Dart, not going to be easy. Kind of a program legend at this point. Set a bunch of passing records for Ole Miss. Ole Miss first-round quarterback since Eli Manning, guy that got drafted to the Giants as well. But Ole Miss is really high on Austin Simmons. If you want, go check out my video where I kind of did a deep dive on Austin Simmons. This is a really intriguing quarterback. 19 years old, already graduated from college, 6'4", left-handed, really smooth operator, incredibly intelligent. This is a guy that Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, really likes. They've kind of been anchoring him as the quarterback of the future for the past 2 years now. But pretty much everything around him is kind of a question mark. Wide receiver, you're losing Trey Harris, you're losing Juice Wells, and Jordan Watkins, your top 3 wide receivers from last year. Caden Lee's coming back. That's a big bonus. But pretty much everybody else in that room is new. You have Deshaun Stribling coming in from Oklahoma State. He's expected to kind of play a major role. Harrison Wallace coming in from Penn State could be a guy that also factors in there. Caleb Cunningham, 5-star wide receiver freshman. Could he potentially get reps as well? I wouldn't count it out. Running back, also kind of a question mark. They let Quinshon Judkins go to Ohio State for 2024, and it showed in the running game. Kind of struggled. And this is a position that's also going to be losing Ulysses Dew Bentley. So Logan Diggs kind of sounds like he's going to take over after a torn ACL. This is a guy that's bounced around, started at Notre Dame, had a couple really good seasons there, went to LSU for a year, didn't play a ton, went to Ole Miss last year, tore his ACL, but he's healthy, should kind of be the number 1 back this year. But after that, not really sure. Defensively, they have a lot of question marks, especially on the D-line. You're losing pretty much every starting defensive lineman. Princely Umamilan, Jared Ivey, Walter Nolan, J.J. Big East, all gone to the NFL. At linebacker, Pupal Jr. is gone, and Trey Amos is gone at cornerback. This is Lane Kiffin. They brought in a ton of guys in the portal. It's going to be interesting. Princely Umamilan, Princely's younger brother, transferred in from Nebraska, a guy that should be one of those key edge rushers for Ole Miss. Son Taron Perkins at linebacker kind of might play more of a hybrid role. He's kind of a Micah Parsons type of player. He's a really big prospect to keep an eye on for this year. Can he step into kind of an All-American type role for Ole Miss? That's always kind of been the expectation for Perkins to get there eventually. But this is a team that still has a lot of talent. Daquan Wright at tight end is going to make a big difference. I think some of these transfers are going to fill holes. And Lane Kiffin is still the head coach for Ole Miss. This is a guy that, love him or hate him, he wins football games. I would be surprised to see Ole Miss win less than 8 games. I think they're probably an 8-9 win team this year. And I think 6 is right around where they're going to end up when the season's done, when we kind of see how those final SEC rankings shake out. I think 6, right around there, is probably a pretty fair estimate for Ole Miss. Now, number 5, I think it's South Carolina. And if you've watched any of my show, you know I'm a really big fan of South Carolina, but I think 5 is probably a fair spot for them right now. They're kind of a trendy offseason pick right now, especially because of the emergence of Lenore Sellers. This is a guy that's going to be one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country, one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks throughout the entire nation, a guy that can run for 150 yards, pass for 300 any given weekend. I really like him, and I think he's going to carry this South Carolina team. Yes, they did lose a good chunk. Wide receiver, running back, kind of iffy. Nick Harbor, who I talked about earlier, he's going to be a big question mark here. Can he put everything together? Can he utilize all those physical traits to showcase what he could do on a football field? That's a really intriguing question for South Carolina this year. I think if Nick Harbor puts kind of everything together, suddenly those questions don't seem as big for South Carolina in terms of playmakers. They're also going to have to kind of shuffle their secondary around a little bit. Lost Nick Imamori, lost a couple cornerbacks, and there's going to be much more of a focus on Dylan Stewart after Kyle Kennard, his departure to the NFL. But Dylan Stewart, freak, absolute freak. 5-star, played really strong as a freshman last year. He'll have a full offseason to kind of develop as that number 1 pass rusher. I think he's going to have a great year. And I think anytime you have kind of that dominant pass rusher, especially in the SEC, that makes a big difference for your defense. If Dylan Stewart can go out and have 10, 12 sacks this year, that's going to be a big bonus for South Carolina. And they're going to be a tough team to beat. I think they're going to be plucky. I think they're going to win a couple games that they might not be supposed to be in. But they're going to be plucky. This is going to be an interesting team. Now, at 4, I have LSU. I didn't know where to put LSU, honestly. Is this the year that they finally break through under Brian Kelly? During his tenure there, they haven't won more than 10 games in the season. That's despite having Jaden Daniels behind center in 2023. That's despite having Garrett Nussmeier throw for 4,000 yards last year. And Brian Kelly also hasn't won a Week 1 matchup in his 3 years in Baton Rouge. That's going to be really interesting, too, this year. They have Clemson in the opener this season. If they start 0-1, that's going to be rough for LSU. They avoid Georgia and Texas on this year's schedule, so they have an opportunity to make a run. Brian Kelly and his staff, they went all in this offseason. They had the top class in 24/7's transfer portal rankings, top 2 or 3 class in pretty much every transfer rankings across the nation, across multiple sources, multiple sites. And you also have a lot of impact guys coming back. Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback coming back is going to be a big bonus there. The guy that led the SEC in passing last year could be even better this year. Caden Durham, running back, really handled business last year as a true freshman. Had 750 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns. Also had 260 receiving yards last year. He's going to be even better as a sophomore coming in, having more strength, having more experience. Going to be a really intriguing running back. Wide receiver room. Aaron Anderson's back after being their most productive wide receiver last year. Had almost 800 receiving yards. Then you pair that with Barrion Brown coming in from Kentucky, a guy that's had over 1,500 career receiving yards, over 120 catches in his career. Also has led the SEC during his time in kick return touchdowns. So you have a guy that's really dynamic in special teams as well. And then Nick Anderson coming in from Oklahoma, a guy that has star potential written all over him. Set the Oklahoma freshman record for touchdown receptions with 10 in 2023. Had 798 receiving yards as a freshman in 2023. Can he get back to that level this year? Offensive line is going to be interesting. They have to replace 4 starters, so how that rotation is going to kind of work out, I think that's going to be something intriguing to watch for LSU. I would expect Tyree Adams to kind of take over that left tackle role. It seems as if that's been the guy there, taking over for Will Campbell. Josh Thompson, a guy that's going to be interesting. I think he's going to get playing time for sure on that offensive line. I don't know if he starts right away, but you turn on his tape against Michigan That's a guy that went up against a top 5 pick in Mason Graham, top 15 pick in Kenneth Grant, and had no issues with that O-line, or with that D-line. So that kind of showcases his high upside potential. And then the defense, they're going to have to be way better, but there's certainly room for that improvement this year. You have Whit Weeks, Devon Keys coming back at linebacker. That's some nice continuity there. Then you bring in a guy in Jakeem Jackson, A.J. Halsey, in that secondary to kind of take over one of the cornerback, one of the safety roles. Those are guys that can step in as immediate contributors, starters right away for LSU. And then the big question, can Harold Perkins get back to previous levels? If Harold Perkins showcases his star potential again, this is a really scary LSU defensive unit. This is the year for LSU. Brian Kelly, you need to put it all together this year. You have one of the best rosters in the country. There's no excuses. You don't have to play Georgia. You don't have to play Texas. LSU, you have to show it this year. So with that, we're going to end our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Please remember to subscribe, like, follow the channel, and if you want, you can also go to Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter for even more sports content, more sports updates that you love. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to